A very good evening to everyone present here tonight. My name is Brian and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the channel. As we'd like to continue improving your experience with us, please help us achieve this by leaving your comments on YouTube or by completing the poll that will be published during this broadcast. Today's seminar features Mr. Edward Van Ness, with his topic being Different Strokes, reflecting on a music career in Indonesia. Mr. Edward Van Ness is a violinist, violist, conductor, writer, and teacher who has lived and worked in Indonesia for over 40 years. From the age of 5, he studied the violin under Anthony Sant Ambrogio, who was a close associate of Joseph Gingold and a key member of a prominent musical family in the USA. His undergraduate and graduate studies in composition and world music were completed at Wesleyan University. He also completed his conducting courses at Boston University, as well as the Eastman School of Music under an advanced graduate study. While in Madras, India, on a Fulbright grant for 2.5 years, he conducted his research on South Indian classical music. He also became a concert performer on the Carnatic Veena and established the Madras Chamber Orchestra. He has taught at the Music Academy of Indonesia, the Universitas Sumatera Utara, as well as the Universitas HKBP Normansen, where he established its musical department in 1986. Mr. Van Ness had also taught at the Medan International School, where he was the head of both the music and technology departments. He's currently leading the development of the Sumatra Conservatoire in Medan, which is Indonesia's oldest school for Western classical music. During his years in Yogyakarta, he founded the group Pro Musica Indonesia, whose players are now among the most prominent orchestra musicians in the country, most of which have reunited within the Nusantara Symphony Orchestra. He's also known as the conductor and artistic director of the historic first complete performances of Handel's Messiah, performed with the original Baroque performance style alongside the Ensemble Normanton and Pro Musica in 1987. 2 years after this, he led a joint concert with National University of Singapore Orchestra in Medan. In April 2005, he conducted the orchestra with cello soloist Cecilia Barczyk of the Ho Chi Minh Conservatory Orchestra in Vietnam, being the first musicians abroad ever to be invited by this institution and the Vietnamese government. Since 2003, he has been the principal and subsequently the resident conductor of the Nusantara Symphony Orchestra, leading the orchestra on many concerts, including the tour to Japan for the Asia Orchestra Festival back in October 2005, along with Hikotaro Yazaki. One of his most recent positions includes his post as the music director and conductor for the Indonesian National Christmas Celebration back in December 2018 in Medan, which included a choir of 1,000 singers and many soloists for an audience of approximately 20,000 people, including the President of Indonesia, Joko Widodo. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice here for all of us today is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Mr. Edward Van Ness join in as our guest for today. I hope they all join me in giving him a warm welcome. Without further ado, once again, a very good evening to Mr. Edward Van Ness. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good evening, Brian. Thank you very much for that, Sterling. I'm very honored by your introduction. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for providing us with all that info as well. So let's start off this interview with the video that you were showing us earlier on. So what would you like to share about the video?
Well, I think anyone who sees it, including myself, after I did it, is a bit surprised because I have sort of several musical personalities that I've pursued, and it's all one person. It's just different facets of my particular experience and my views about music being something like a language. So if we can speak several languages, like we should be able to play several musics. Of course, it's also involved with my particular experiences and the different cultures of these musics in America and India, and particularly Indonesia for the past 45 years now. So that's why you see so many different things, and it's still going on. It's still happening. So.
Well, I have to say this though. Kudos to you for actually being able to compile everything from the past 45 years into a single video, though.
It was a great challenge, and there's so many things I left out. The next job will be to fill it out a bit more, but I think you get the idea. It's been quite a life. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Well, so what brought you to this particular part of the world? Why Indonesia in particular?
Well, there really, as we discussed earlier, there are really two reasons. One was I had this abiding interest in the music of India and Southeast Asia that I had encountered when I was in college. And the second reason was that I was engaged to the person who was to become my wife, who was from Solo, Central Java. And so there were two strong reasons for me to come to Indonesia the first time in 1971, then a trip to India in until 1974 in the Fulbright. And then I came back. I thought I'd stay for 6 months. We got married, but I'm still here. So it must be very interesting. Yeah.
It's part of that package deal, I suppose, that you're now staying there for the past, 45 years.
Mm.
So, as you mentioned, as relating to that, so you, like we said, you have spent nearly 50 years teaching and performing music in India and various parts of Southeast Asia. So, what would you say has been your biggest hurdles and challenges in pursuing this?
I think there's a single word that probably encompasses the whole challenge. All of the challenges involved, and that has to do with culture. If we're talking about Western classical music, it has a certain cultural context. and it developed in that cultural context. So if we move somewhere else, take the music somewhere else, there's no guarantee that it will take root. Now, some aspects of it have certainly taken root. And, for example, in Indonesia, the national anthem is 100% a Western diatonic anthem, for example, yeah. And through the various missionary activities over several centuries, of course, music has come in through the churches, Western music, but it still has kind of a marginalized position in the whole configuration of musics and cultures. And of course, I hear frequently people say, "Oh, pop music is eating us up." Well, I don't think so. If you do pop music as well, if you're a classical musician, probably trained, you can play pop music very well, and you can be part of that world as much as anything else. And I notice with my musicians that they actually don't have any barriers in their minds between pop and jazz and classical music. But getting back to the whole idea that classical music has a story, a particular story, which is from a different world. And when we play that music, we're trying to bring out that story, bring out that narrative. This has been the most difficult thing. It's also for audiences a difficult thing to simply be quiet and listen and expect to be getting something other than just great sound and technical ability, So I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's ongoing, yeah, for me.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure we do see a bit of that over here as well.
I would think so, yeah.
So have you seen much progress on regarding this over this long period of time that you've been there?
Well, of course, the most striking thing is, particularly, I would say, in the last 10, 15 years, has been the arrival back in Indonesia of trained people abroad. Previously, all of the best musicians were tending to stay in Europe or in America or in Australia, depending on where they went, or Japan, yeah. But now we're seeing more and more younger musicians are coming back, and there's more kind of for lack of a better word, qualified teaching going on. And they're bringing back more current views about how to play classical music, for example, performing practice, and how to bring improvisation back into the classical music world, which really just disappeared in the 20th century. At around the same time there was recording technology, we were able to record a piece of music, and it became an object, and therefore repeatability became something that was perhaps unavoidable, because it sure had a tremendous impact. But now among classical musicians, there's a strong tendency to go back to the way that music was played in its particular historical context. And we know that before the 20th century, everyone was improvising. So, and it's not just a free-for-all. There's rules and there's conventions, and so that's something that's really noticeable happening now. I think in Malaysia, you have Baroque music groups now popping up in Kuala Lumpur and Penang. They're excellent, and you have the Red Baroque in Singapore, and I think it's something that's very striking that's happening now. That's different from the past. Yeah.
I suppose from your perspective, that's like a very big change to be watching happen over your lifetime. So yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, Ed. As you mentioned, despite all this change that's been happening, and because of the current times with the pandemic hitting, which definitely caused a lot of problems for everyone, how has the pandemic affected your activities in helping to develop this?
Well, of course, when I was doing studies with Boston University in the States, a lot of it was done online because I was here and they were there. And so I was quite used to the idea or the concepts and some of the methods of actually teaching and learning online, and I have accepted it as in fact, as a matter of fact, with my history classes at the Sumatra Conservatoire, already 4 years ago, I was using the internet as a resource and creating materials that were given to students online with links online that they could listen to. They could listen to real music. Previously, you couldn't do that. You'd have to wait until you had a CD. Or in the old days, I remember in Jogja, when I was teaching in Jogja in the 70s and 80s, I remember teaching someone the Mozart G major concerto, and immediately the student said to me, "Do you have the cassette for this?" Because there were no recordings available. But now with the internet, it's, and we're all listening to the same resources, yeah. And the rate of expansion and development of internet is an absolute boon for the online teaching that I do. I'm very fortunate also. I don't have to be doing Sesame Street, which is basically what one has to do with the younger kids. If you're teaching online with young children, you have to imagine what engages them on TV and watch programs like Sesame Street and the way they present concepts in a way that the kids can follow. Yeah. With my older students, they're all advanced students. As a matter of fact, we have some problems with latency and things, but in fact, they are doing in some ways better because they're very focused. They have lots of time to practice. And I've found it very, very successful, actually. I'm very proud of what my students have been doing. So, but it's one has to work hard at it. You know, it was not all that new for me, but it is a new situation to be wholly dependent on it. Yeah. So.
True. I suppose it's been the same, like, how do I explain this? I suppose it's been a recurring theme of what our guests have been saying. Like, basically with the pandemic hitting, like the appreciation of music and the learning process has been greatly developed, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I think with my students, there's little things, like I encourage them to use earbuds, use headphones, because in fact, they hear much more detail on recordings of a sort. Yeah, it's not like the acoustic physical presence of nothing can replace live music, but they can hear details that they would probably never notice when they're using headphones and modern and contemporary technology, just even with regular hand phones, So there's a whole region there, a whole area of learning there that's really interests me. So as a matter of fact, I did this, I have to tell you very frankly, that presentation video that you saw, I started that last night at about 8:00, and it took me about 5 hours. Perhaps a year ago, I couldn't do that because I've been learning how to use DaVinci and other video programs over the past year because I have the time, so.
Fair enough. Yeah, I suppose that's another thing that we've all been doing, basically try and pick up new skills and such. But yeah, all right. Well, thanks for sharing your thoughts on that, Ed. Before we move on forward, I would just like to remind our audience members, if you do have any questions for Ed, please leave them in the in the live chat down below on YouTube. And for those of you on Zoom, please leave them in the Q&A section, and we'll address them shortly. All right, so moving on with our questions. So, what are your thoughts and plans for the future, especially like maybe once the pandemic actually does blow over, hopefully?
Well, yeah. In the meantime, I mean, we can't really predict how long this will be like this. It could be another year. It's not going to be just 6 months, I suppose. Yeah, maybe we'll go on to some mixed live, limited physical presence and the rest online. I, of course, will continue to work to develop my online skills and to engage my students in actually more in a collaborative kind of approach. For example, I teach a history class at the conservatory, and I've developed a whole, it's about 500 slides now of the complete history of Western European classical music from Gregorian chant right up until today, right up until right now. So, and that that's something potentially to publish. I haven't thought about doing that yet, but the thing about it is that things are changing so fast that you really have to use digital media, because the minute you write something down, it's already obsolete. You know, a lot of books now are being published, not physically on paper, but online, because it circulates much faster. But the reality is that we are getting more and more information, more and more results of research, ideas, new performance ideas, particularly in the cross-cultural area. And it's in order to keep up, I find the digital media is much more flexible, so I can make changes on the fly sometimes. Yeah. So obviously I will continue to do that. The other thing is that I'm trying to, now I'm in Medan in Indonesia, and I was told recently that 5G is already around the place somewhere, but I don't live in an area where it's available, and most of my students don't either. But 5G will, if it does get going, and hopefully it gets going pretty soon, then latency will be less of a problem. That means we can actually begin to play together online, which will be a whole new possibility. All the other things, outreach, I'm really glad to hear that the majority of people who are probably listening in today are students, young students, my great friends, the future of music, and parents who are so important in the whole process. So I'm finding that also I can use things like Zoom and Google Meet to have meetings with parents. It's much easier to organize things because we don't have to physically be in one place. We don't have to deal with traffic. And so I'm thinking more and more about developing how I might use the medium in a more collaborative, more global way than just teaching in the old-fashioned way. Of course, you know what you were saying. The pandemic has shook us up, but it's here to stay. I mean, the shakeup is this is partially it's no longer the new normal. This is our normal. It always was our, whatever is happening at that particular time, that is the normal. So yeah, we get used to it. And I must remind everybody always that our kids are actually sometimes much more tech savvy than we are. So I'm learning a lot from them about how to do stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it goes on. Yeah.
Well, just to elaborate a bit on this, so because this has been a topic of discussion with some of our previous guests as well, do you feel like once the pandemic actually does blow over, do you feel like most musicians will revert back to physical media, or do you feel like the online medium seems to be the best way to move forward with everything?
I think there is always a place for live music. It may change. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of panic. I think it was, I forget, Simon Rattle who said that. A conductor said maybe it's the end of big orchestras, because big orchestras, well, of course, physically, if you have to be careful with physical distancing and things like that, then that's going to be a problem, right? You can't have the same size 85 to 100 musicians in one place, and then thousands of people, an audience in the hall. So it may mean that we will have realignment between on the physical side, we'll have more of the sort of chamber orchestra type programs, and more use of digital media, because even before this happened, many people were preferring to actually stay at home and hear music on their home theaters, because you know the technology had become so good. It was already a threat. It was such a threat that over really 10 years ago already, most big orchestras weren't making CDs anymore. They were doing live, they weren't doing studio recordings. They were doing CDs, but live one take recordings from concerts. And then of course I don't know what the situation is now, but most are doing online stuff. So yeah, there will be readjustments made, but probably it remains to be seen exactly how it's going to come out. Some things we can't predict, but I think we have to always have a creative mind for these things. And as with music, if you're studying music, then one of the things I always tell my student is the difference between someone who's just moving their fingers or typing on the piano or something and a real artist is the artist is imagining something before he or she plays, and then he plays to that. So you imagine a different world and you prepare for that, you know. So I think artists are going to be very important in this process. The reconfiguration of life, artistic life, and day-to-day life, for that matter, and school and everything else.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that insight with us. Yeah, we'll definitely it'll definitely be something to look forward to, I suppose, like how musicians will move on from all this.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, okay, I think we should still have time for a few more questions before we move on to the Q&A section. So, moving on, going back to regarding the pandemic a little bit more, because as you mentioned, as you mentioned, you've had over 45 years of experience in the music industry, especially in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. How would you feel? Because as you mentioned, technology now has made it so much easier to like overcome the barrier of having to physically distance each other and everything. How would you feel musicians would have taken on this problem back then when the internet wasn't actually a thing? How would you feel musicians would survive during a time like this?
Hypothetically, if there had been no pandemic, what would be going on now? Or yeah. Well, I think, if I come back to one of my original statement that the challenge of with regard to Western music is the fact of its different context, its different narratives, its different the messages being sent by performers to the audience, the reasons why composers created music. I mean, it's not just classical music. The great group, the Beatles, almost every one of their great songs was written based on something that actually happened to one of them, and it created a song. It generated a song. And a lot of the great music that was written in a particular context. And I can give you a really interesting story. The great violinist Midori came to Jogja way back when I was in Jogja, and there was a string quartet of students who came to me and said, "We want to play. She's going to do a masterclass for string quartets." I said, "Okay, what are you guys going to do?" They said, "We're going to play the Smetana First Quartet, which has an absolutely killer viola solo at the beginning. It's one of the hardest viola solos ever written." And so I said, "Okay, I'll come, and would you coach us so we can get ready?" So I went and listened to the rehearsals, and they were cutting the notes. They were actually doing all the notes, but they had an idea that because it's romantic music, they should really kill it. So they were pushing their tone to breaking, and it was just very rough. And some of it was, they were also making some mistakes because they were overplaying. So I said to them, "Guys, look, pull back, just do everything that's on the page, right? This is this late 19th century material where there's so many markings on the page. If you just play the markings, it's already going to sound, yeah? And you don't have to decimate the music like that." So they pulled back, and they were playing, I thought, playing a lot better. So then comes the moment. Midori was sitting, I'm sitting here, and Midori was sitting 2 people over, and they started playing. She stopped them and she said, guys, do you know what's the story you want to tell with this? Isn't this like, there's this volcano, Merapi, right outside 30 kilometers from here, which is about ready to explode. And shouldn't you be bringing out that explosive character? It's exactly the opposite that I was telling them. So, there are going to be stages. There are stages in bringing out the narrative, but you have to be able to cut the notes, number one. Number two, the narrative is something has different interpretations. That's what keeps it alive. Yeah. So there's plenty of work to be done on that side, where people I often say to the orchestra members, guys, you don't come in the rehearsal hall and leave your culture outside the door. So most of them are Javanese in Jakarta, and they have a limit to what they can do with music that has to be very expressive. A friend of mine tried to do a concert with them of all Brahms in one concert. The whole concert was Brahms, and the first symphony of Brahms was the opening piece, and they cut it for about 2 minutes, and then you could hear them just starting to melt because it was a kind of a sound world that they weren't used to. They didn't know the narrative, and probably in the end, it's not the right kind of music for them anyway, because music has its character, and some is not necessarily in the Asian character, right? So, but look what everybody wants to do. Big orchestras, when they start an orchestra, everybody wants to head for Mahler. But there's the problem of choosing a right repertoire, how it will communicate to the audience, and whether it really resonates with the performers themselves as musicians, not just even technical matters. Yeah. So it's a big world there, interesting world, cross-culturally.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Ed. That was definitely a very interesting insight into how we should be interpreting the music and such. I think we've about run out of time for these questions, so we do have time for one last one before we move on to the Q&A section for our audience. So this one comes from the JPO itself. So as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra has involved itself in a variety of activities. So on behalf of the JPO, we would like to ask about your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, how would you suggest that the JPO and its members further improve itself?
Well, it was with great interest and just plain enjoyment to catch up with Mr. Yapling and find out about how things are going. We hadn't been in touch for a while. During the pandemic, we've all been kind of working in our little, I'm working in my little room in my house mostly, yeah.
Everyone's in their own little bubbles, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, but because we have to, but the whole concept of what, as the Jesselton Philharmonic has been doing, is absolutely spot on. It always will come down to, I think, how do we train and evaluate young musicians? Because the orchestra is only going to be as good as the individual players, right? So pedagogy means evaluations, and until now, as in Indonesia also, one of the dominant kind of yardsticks has been the ABRSM exams, which are very good, which are very well structured, and they do have a transparency with their rubrics, which you can see. In other words, so if you go on the ABRSM sites, you can see, if you're taking violin grade 6, you can see how they're going to grade you, what you need to do to get a good grade. That's fine. It's really, really excellent stuff. And the repertoire is graded, it's excellent. The only problem that is now we have this economic downturn, and it's quite expensive. So I think the idea of Jesselton initiating, and maybe we need to actually work on this together because Indonesia faces the same issues, working to develop some kind of a set of rubrics and a system and an opportunity for people to take examinations and get positive, constructive, honest assessments of their playing. It's certainly time to continue on that track. As far as one of the things I'm doing, we have student concerts at my school, and because I've taken up multimedia, I am now working on. I've done a couple things where we've done actually small ensemble short pieces online, and I can put them together on with my computer and my software and stuff. But now we're doing some more complex things. I mean, we should look into the possibility of doing joint concerts. Whatever we can do in the digital media, we haven't done it all. So, and there's probably things that we can share ideas and come up with new things to do. So, and of course, the other thing is outreach to parents. And again, as I said, with my case, it's been very helpful. The digital, you can establish groups or particularly talk to people individually. And very often I find they're more honest and they feel less threatened because it's a one-to-one connection. So bravo, Jesselton, keep going. Yeah.
All right.
We put our heads together, yeah, and see what else we can do to help both of us out.
Thanks for that. I'm very sure Yapling is definitely happy to hear all these comments from you, and I'm very sure he's planning to collaborate with you on all this as well.
Yeah, I realize this is a very dangerous conversation because we're creating a lot of work for ourselves, but it's okay. We like to do it. It keeps us out of trouble, I guess. Yeah.
It will definitely keep you guys busy for the time being as well.
So it is, yeah.
Yeah. All right. With that, I think we'll move on to the Q&A section soon. But before that, I think we do have a few pictures that you share with us that we're about to show on screen. All right.
Okay.
Yep. So they're coming on now. There's a bit of a connection issue, I think. Yep, there it is.
It's a long shot of my old Harley in Jogja. Yeah. That's an acoustic violin, but you see the microphone on the bridge? It's going through a digital system, so.
Okay.
This is a recital I did a couple of years ago, 2014. Adventure in time and space, because that's what a concert is. It's an adventure. It should be in that case.
All right.
So our ensemble, our kids at the school, this is actually a couple of years ago. Most of them are getting pretty big now.
I was about to mention that you should blend it in very well with the background early on. This was from the jazz festival early on.
This was at Lake Toba in Samosir in Lake Toba, just 1 month before the pandemic broke.
Okay.
We call it the Star Wars concert. It looks like Star Wars with the.
It definitely looked very flashy with all the lighting effects.
Yeah. Well, it's a jazz concert, so they always do stuff. The guitarist is my good friend. That's his group. Yeah, and this is with the NSO, Nusantara Symphony in Jakarta. That's with President Megawati way back when she was in office. Okay. She came 3 times to our concerts. She was a great supporter. And this is my group, improvisation group. We call ourselves Voyager. This is very recent. Yeah. It includes an opera singer, a jazz musician, myself. The lady in the back is a German graduate of the pianist. She's very good. And then the guy on the far right is an expert in all manner of Sumatranese drumming and keyboards. So this is an improvisation group. And of course, there's someone in the middle who's snuck into the picture. No, actually, that's not a fake picture. He was there, and we asked him to sit there, and it was. This was the Penang, the Georgetown String Festival 2 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so this is quite recent as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's about it.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks again for sharing those pictures with us, Ed. So yeah, I think with that we'll move on to the Q&A section. So we do have a few questions from the audience. Just let me get them loaded up properly. Yep. Okay. So this is coming from one of our viewers. Hi Ed, thanks for your interesting sharing. Do you find the acquired skill needed to play different genres of music comes easier from actually learning it, or from more on the exposure?
That's an interesting question. I assume you mean exposure in its original context, or listening to other performers. If that's what you mean by exposure, it's a combination of both. Even if you were studying classical piano in Europe or the United States, or violin or whatever, when you reach a certain level where but actually really at all levels in one way, about 50% is what you learn from technical skill, and the other 50% is listening to real music and also doing real music. It's all those avenues are important. I think if you're just learning how to move your fingers, you will have to depend an awful lot on just sheer imagination to get anywhere. So, and I think it's impossible. So in fact, I think they're both, in regards to your question, they're both important: exposure and also learning the necessary skills.
All right. Well, thanks for that, Ed. I'm pretty sure that they'll take that to heart. Moving on, we do have another question coming in. So, hi, what changes have you seen so far in for your time in Indonesia over a span of a few decades? Would you like to share particular changes with us?
Well, if I would, in the area of composition, composers have proliferated. There's a lot of composers now, and some of them are very good. Some of them have studied abroad. Some of them are composers who've been students when I was teaching in Yogyakarta, for example, which is already 35 years ago, and they've matured. A lot of them are having their music played outside Indonesia, and they've gotten attention. String playing particularly is the most noticeable one that has just taken off in the major cities, particularly in Jakarta and Surabaya. But it's because of people who've gone abroad, studied, and come back, and they've started their own studios. And there are many good young players, probably 10 times what they were even 20 years ago. They're young players though, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that the music has suddenly become very rich and mature. It means that we have better sounding groups, yeah, but we still have this problem of the cultural setting, yeah, and the other understandings that one needs to do it. So,
all right. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I would just like to expand on this particular one a bit. Are there any particular moments or fond memories that you have had during your time in Indonesia and Southeast Asia?
Fond memories. There are many.
Which one stand out the most, basically?
Well, I guess, when I was conducting the Nusantara Symphony starting in 2002. And then we had a plan, we had a project where we took them to the Asian Orchestra Festival in Japan, in Tokyo and Osaka in 2005. And I worked really hard, and we got accepted on the roster because the group came together. We were having 3 rehearsals a week. Part of the orchestra was in Jakarta, part of them was in Yogyakarta. I was going back and forth every week, and it all happened. So we went to the festivals, and we were all thinking, well, we're like the little guys around the place, right? Because you had big orchestras from Japan, you had Guangzhou Symphony, which is first class. You had 2 orchestras from Australia. We thought, well, we'll just try and not sound too bad. Well, the memorable thing was, number one, the first concert was in Osaka, Symphony Hall in Osaka. And I started a rehearsal, and we played for about 10 measures, and I had to stop because the orchestra sounded so good. It was the hall. It was the halls in Japan are unbelievable. And we realized that how much the hall, it suddenly came together. It just sounded like it wasn't the same group, right? The second thing was that we did very well, and the Japanese, who are not very easy to please, got up on their feet and were clapping for us for like 5 minutes.
Oh my.
And so I thought, this is wonderful. This is, and the orchestra, I felt really great with them. So we finished the concert in Osaka, went out the back door, and there were a bunch of, we call them groupies in the rock world outside, who wanted my, this was all something really exciting. They wanted my signature and the players and blah, blah, blah. So we got in the things and went, then we flew to Tokyo. 3 days later, did the same program in Symphony Hall in Tokyo, and also got the same response from the audience. Went out the back door, and some of the same people were there that had been in Osaka. They followed the group. So, that meant, for me, that meant something very important. We had done something that they really appreciated. Maybe it wasn't that we weren't playing perfectly, but we were playing with real commitment and style. And that's something really important. Whatever you do it with full commitment. It will impress people, and you can bring them into that's one. The only other thing I would say is, once I did a performance of the Unanswered Question by Charles Ives, which is a very strange piece. The unanswered question is, it puts flutes in the back of the auditorium and a trumpet behind stage, and the orchestra, the strings are on stage and playing this beautiful, very quiet hymn tune. And everyone's saying, oh, the audiences, they won't like this, it's no good. They actually got the idea of the unanswered question. The question is being asked by the trumpet player and answered by the wind players in the back of the audience, while the orchestra strings are playing this beautiful, unrelated hymn tune, just beautiful, yeah. So, yeah, it's all about communication. If you communicate at that level, that we feel good. So,
thanks for sharing those. Sorry.
There are others, but those. Since you asked me, I think those would be the ones that stand out.
Well, the one regarding the Asia Orchestra Festival was definitely a very eye-opening one. So thanks for sharing both those stories with us, Ed. So yeah,
you're very welcome.
All right, I think we have about time for maybe 1 or 2 last questions from our Q&A. So we have one from the audience saying, generally, what would you describe the awareness and the playing or performing level of music in Southeast Asia?
Oh, it's going up, up, up. It just continues to develop because players are getting better trained. Orchestras like the Bangkok Symphony, a friend of mine who's conducting that orchestra, and the MPO in Kuala Lumpur and the Singapore Symphony, they're all going up, up, up. And increasingly, they're not depending completely on non-Asian members. There's more and more Malaysians, for example, who are playing in the MPO, for example. There's more and more, Bangkok is different. The Bangkok Symphony has always been dominated by Thai people because it has a different context. Yeah. Western music has had a longer life there and has more of a particular support from Thai society. So, but yeah, and the Philippines, we forget about the Philippines. You know, they've always had great orchestras. I haven't heard much from them recently, but yeah, up and up is the word, you know.
All right. With that, I think we may have to end the night's program. So once again, thanks again for all your responses, Ed.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to talk, as you can see, but talk about things that are very close to my career and my heart. So thank you very much for all those good questions from the audience, and everybody keep working, keep practicing, keep making music.
All right. Well, your experiences were definitely very enjoyable to listen to anyway. So yeah, I'm very sure everyone in the audience can agree on that.
Good.
So
Thank you.
with that, I think that about sums it up. So we'd just like to remind everyone that our JPO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. So that's every Sunday and Wednesday. So join us next time with our next guest, who will be revealed at a later date. More details on this can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on the YouTube channel, along with the past and soon to be broadcasted webinars. So feel free to share the Zoom webinar registration link, the JPO YouTube channel, or maybe even the JPO Facebook page with your friends and family. For our YouTube audience, if you are enjoying our program, please show your support to us by pressing the like and subscribe button down below. Once again, you guys have been an amazing audience, and we from the JPO family wishes that everyone stays safe and healthy as we continue to face this crisis together. So with that, I will now be leading the prayer to end tonight's program. So please pray in whatever faith that you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. We pray that everyone in the world continues to stay strong in surviving through these difficult times, and that a solution to the virus will soon be found. We pray that governments across the world continue to improve upon their efforts and decision-making so as to protect their people and curb the spread of the virus. We pray for the safety and well-being of everyone working as we now make our way through August, and as the virus continues to rage on in many parts of the world. We pray for the continued safety and morale of the frontliners who are risking their lives so that they may continue to provide for those in need. With that, once again, thank you, Ed. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time. Maybe you can even visit Malaysia again once everything does blow over.
All the best. Stay safe, stay healthy, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye. Take care.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.